Another question I would like to draw your attention to is Victorian courtship and marriage ceremonies. So the question of choosing the spouse was again evolving compared with the 18th century. In the 18th century, as you remember, there was a relative novelty of allowing young people the freedom of choosing the spouses themselves. Then in the Romantic period, there was the glorification of love and mutual attraction, rather than, let's say, the 18th century model of the companionate marriage. And now, how it looked in the Victorian culture. So, very much following the example of Queen Victoria herself. The idea was that people should marry for love, but they should fall in love with appropriate people, someone who would be accepted by the family. So this was the attempt to combine two aspects of private life in choosing your future partner yourself, but choosing someone who the family would accept. So someone from your own sphere, from a similar economic background, from a similar social background. This was quite a popular thing in the 19th century. In practice, how people met the future spouses. There are two very popular ways that people met the appropriate future partners. One was something that I guess is not a very popular way today, namely the extended family. If you remember, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert were first cousins. Their parents were brother and sister. So Victorian families with large numbers of children, you had lots of cousins, first cousins, second cousins. There was quite a lot of social interaction among those extended families, and the marriage between cousins was something considered quite normal. It was rather popular to fall in love with your cousin, first or second cousin, to marry them. It was not against the law, it was not even frowned upon by the society as something verging on incest. Worse still, you could marry your uncle. There was no law against actually marrying your uncle. There were some strange rules. For example, you couldn't marry the brother or sister of your first spouse if the spouse died. There were some famous cases. One of the Pre-Raphaelite painters, William Holman Hunt, had this situation towards the end of the 19th century. His first wife died of natural causes, and gradually he became quite attached to his wife's sister. They fell in love, they wanted to marry. There was nothing immoral about that, but there was a law against such marriages on the grounds that they were too closely related. Mind you, the uncles were not too closely related. William Holman Hunt actually petitioned the government, and his campaign led to the changing of the law at the very end of the 19th century, but this is one of the things that were quite strange in Victorian courtship. Another popular way of choosing the future husband or wife was the friendly circles. Of course, these were usually not the friends that you made at school, because the majority of schools were not mixed, not co-educational. They were either schools only for boys or only for girls. But in the Victorian society, it was absolutely commonplace that if you made a friend, for example at school, you would very quickly befriend the entire family of your friend. So people did not cultivate this kind of exclusivity in friendship and the distancing of their social life with family and with friends. So if you had a close friend, you would very quickly be invited home. Sometimes, if the family could afford it, if they had the means to accept guests for longer periods, you could be invited for a longer period at holidays, for example, to visit your friend's family, to meet the parents, to meet the brothers or sisters, sometimes even more extended family. And this was very common to fall in love and to form romantic attachments. For example, if you were a young man at the university and you are visiting the family of your university friend, you might form such attachment to one of his sisters or close cousins or any other family members. This was very popular. This was regarded as something that the families would normally accept because the friendships were happening between people from similar social backgrounds. So this was very, very popular. How was Victorian courtship different from the most typical ways of courtship today? The majority of courtship in the 19th century was conducted in public in the presence of other people, or perhaps out of doors during picnics or sporting activities or something like that. Young people were very rarely left completely alone, especially young women. There was a system of so-called chaperoning. The chaperone was usually a more responsible older woman, could be a relative, could be a governess, could be even a responsible servant who would accompany the young lady from her teenage years basically until the time she married, so that she would never be left alone with a man, because this could basically cast a shadow on her reputation. And the reputation of a young woman from a good social sphere was probably her most important asset. So if young people had an understanding, as it was called then, so they formed a mutual attraction. They could speak to each other more or less privately, but usually in a company of others. They could exchange letters. They could dance together. This was quite popular to enjoy social dances. This was a relatively new thing in Victorian culture, dancing in pairs, dancing things like the polka and then the waltz, which was a very fashionable dance because it was enjoyed in pairs, and the man could actually embrace a woman he danced with, and because this was done in a company, this was considered to be quite moral. Even Queen Victoria waltzed even before she was crowned, so this was considered something that was acceptable socially. Then, of course, when the proper time came, the man proposed. He could propose in a letter if there was the understanding between the future spouses. The idea that the man had to propose to the father is not exactly true. However, if the woman agreed, the next step was to consult the family or to ask the permission of the family, usually including the talk with the father about the way that the future bridegroom imagined living and supporting the family. But it was not done in a way that the man had to propose to the father before proposing to the future bride. However, the agreement of the legal guardian, so the father or somebody responsible for the young woman, was quite important. Then the marriage ceremony itself. What is different from the most common usage today is that marriages, this was actually the law in the Church of England. All marriage ceremonies had to be performed in the morning or at the latest around noontime, not in the afternoon. This was the old tradition, going back to the fact that the pubs normally were not opened in the morning, so to make sure that the future spouses and especially the bridegroom were sober, the way to be legally married was to be married in the morning. And what followed usually was the wedding breakfast. So the most important kind of social meal after the ceremony was not a kind of dinner or a dance in the evening, but a wedding breakfast around noontime. The practice of going for honeymoon together, of course, it could be the entire month or even longer if the families could afford it, or it could be just a weekend, but it was a very popular practice, allowing the young people to be finally left alone, basically. They could kiss after they were engaged. It was socially acceptable for the engaged people to kiss their fiancé, but of course any other form of intimacy in the middle class and upper class was not allowed. The situation in the villages among the country folk was somewhat different, and there is evidence that in some village communities actually the sufficient reason to marry was only if the girl was pregnant, because of course the divorce, as you know from one of the previous episodes, was not obtainable, especially if you were not very rich. So the marriage was for life, and it was very important that the wife could bear children, especially in village communities, when the hands to work in the fields and to tend the animals were very, very important. So in some village communities among the country folk, it was actually expected for the courting people to produce a pregnancy before they were married. If there was no pregnancy, very often the families would not allow the marriage. It went that far, but not in the middle class environment and not in the upper class environment. For those sections of the society, it was, at least theoretically, evident that the bride was a virgin. There are some stories circulated about the horrors of wedding nights for some brides. There is a very popular saying that Victorian mothers apparently instructed their daughters on the wedding night or before the wedding night what they should do. So the typical advice was close your eyes and think about England. There are some legends that even Queen Victoria said this to her daughter. Probably not. And if we know anything about Queen Victoria's wedded life, it was very happy also in the sexual sense. But there are some known stories from the diaries and letters of Victorian brides who were quite shocked by the physical reality of the wedding night, because they never expected something like that from their fiancés who were so respectful and caring and basically what they expected was reading poetry and dancing, perhaps, and maybe kissing. There were some cases of women running away, mostly to their parents' home, shouting that the bridegroom has lost his mind, that he became mad and aggressive and attacked them. But of course, this is not the rule. The majority of people, even young women, had some sort of idea what to expect. So even if they were virgins, and especially the bridegrooms were expected to know something, if not actually have some experience, sometimes with a prostitute. So this brings us back to the previous week. So that's about courtship and marriage, and we continue in a moment.